Hello, everyone, and welcome to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I am your host. I am an author of 3 historical fictions. My most recent title is She Was an American Spy During World War II. Today in the studio, I would like to welcome Linda C. McCabe, author of Quest of the Warrior Maiden. Welcome, Linda.
Hi, Jeane. Thank you so much for having me here.
It's a pleasure. I just love the cover of your book.
Thank you. That's actually the second version. The first one I did was much more symbolic, and I got some feedback on that and was suggested to get a woman's face on it. So Ian Morris helped me develop this as a very powerful cover.
It is, especially with the weapon right on the face.
Yes.
Is this a particular warrior?
That would be Bradamante, the heroine of my story.
Oh, so it is.
Yes.
Yeah, I was very curious about it. I like that it's on the spine also. There she is.
Yes.
Peeking out on the spine.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is the C? Why do you put a C in the middle of your name, Linda C. McCabe?
Because there's other Linda McCabes who are authors. There's one who writes about management and another one who is a geneticist. So to avoid confusion with other Linda McCabes who are authors, I use my middle initial of C. So my website uses the C in it as well.
Well, I can see why you do that now.
Okay.
I know you have a master's degree of history of science from Sonoma State.
Yes.
Which probably made you very interested in writing such a...
Having training as a historian makes me feel much more responsible to get the historical details correct. And I agonize over things probably more than others. And so that's part of it. And being the science background, I have a very analytical side of me as well. And I'm juggling a lot of characters and a lot of character storylines, et cetera, in time frames. So that helps having this training.
And I know in order to write this amazing novel, actually, why don't you tell us what is the genre of the novel?
It is an epic, historic fantasy set during the time of Charlemagne. And so for those that enjoy Arthurian legend, it's similar in tone and style, but it's Carolingian legend, which is not as popular in this day and age.
And I see that it is volume 1.
Yes, I am working on the second volume, on the sequel.
Because it's very involved, and I know that you have to do an amazing amount of research.
I do. My story is actually based on, and I brought this as visual aid, 2 different epic poems that were written during the Italian Renaissance. The first poem was Orlando Innamorato by Matteo Maria Boiardo, which is pretty much forgotten even in Italy today. The second one, Orlando Furioso, you can see here is in 2 volumes. That we are nearing its 500th anniversary of its publication, which was originally published in 1516. So in 2016, I hope to go back to Italy with the sequel done to celebrate the 500th publication of it then.
Oh, that's very fortunate.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Hence the word epic.
Yes, as you can see how large these poems were, and I'm trimming it down to one storyline that I really cared for, which was the Bradamante and Rogero. The stories themselves are like these huge tapestry of medieval knights going here and there, and interweaving plot lines, and I decided to take the one plot line that I liked the most, and anything that kept with that I kept into the narrative, and everything else I would cut so that it wasn't as unwieldy as these poems can be.
Sounds like a lot of meticulous work, but it sounds like you also enjoy it.
Yes, and I had to learn a lot about medieval history, because before deciding to embark on this huge undertaking, I really was not a devotee of medievalism. I am now, but I wasn't at that time, so I had to learn a lot about medieval culture, medieval religion, foods, dress, etc., so that I can make it feel realistic, even though the story of the war never is a fiction, just as a story written to entertain the patrons of the poets.
Mm-hmm. And your book was honored by the Bay Area Independent Publishers Association.
Yes, and I'm very happy about that. So yes.
It was great that they picked your book.
Yes, as the best historic fantasy.
So I guess you would consider The Quest of the Warrior Maiden. It is the legends of Charlemagne coming to life.
Yes.
In a saga of chivalry, secret romances, betrayal, revenge, and magic.
Yes.
A lot of great ingredients for a story.
Right. So yes, it is fantasy, because there is magical realms, and there's flying hippogriffs, and wizards and enchantresses. So yes, so that makes it the fantasy element.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, where does your story actually take place?
It starts in the year 802, and Charlemagne, who is a historic figure, was crowned as emperor of the Western Roman Empire in Christmas Day 800. So this is after he's been made emperor, and it takes place in the Frankish Empire. So you see the beginning of it outside of the city of Toulouse, which is in modern-day France, and the North African Muslims have invaded the Frankish Empire, trying to extend Islam.
How did you become interested in this time period? Was it through going to school, or was it through favorite books?
I came upon Orlando Furioso from a very strange origin. I was involved in the Harry Potter online fandom, and I was debating people on where I thought the books were going to go. This is before it was finished. And there was a theory regarding hippogriffs as being a symbol of love. And so I read Orlando Furioso so I could see when the hippogriff was used as a character in literature for the first time. And that's when I discovered this amazing love story between Bradamante and Rogero. And Bradamante is the niece of Charlemagne and a warrior, a respected warrior. And she meets and falls in love with a Saracen warrior descended from Hector of Troy. So they're on opposite sides of a holy war, and it's really hard for them to get together. And I was just taken by this story of impossible love and wondered why I had never heard of this story. I knew all about Tristan and Isolde, and I knew about Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot, but I had never heard of Bradamante and Rogero, and felt that I should have. And I decided at one point to try and remedy that lack in our culture by trying to bring this to a new audience, by taking away some of the stiffness of the poem and making it into a modern day novel so it would be accessible to modern day audiences.
How common was it that there were female warriors?
It wasn't common, but there were quite a few examples in history. This past May, I went to the International Medieval Congress held in Kalamazoo, Michigan, on the campus of Western Michigan University. And it's a very popular conference. There's over 3,500 medievalists, and there were over 400 sessions over a 4-day period. And so I went to one of the sessions, and it was talking about women warriors. And they were giving example after example from legend and from history. And so while it wasn't as common as today's female recruits in the Army or in our military, they did happen. And sometimes they would disguise themselves as men for various purposes, and other times they would be on their own, either protecting their family's castle or entering the army themselves. So
I know, is that where you went to sell your book?
I went to Italy this last June.
Yeah.
And we had a book signing at the English bookshop in Milan. And that was a lot of fun. And Milan did have a link to Orlando Furioso, in that the patron family of these poets were the noble house of Desta, and they were from Ferrara. And one of the daughters, Beatrice d'Este, married the Duke of Milan. So there was that connection, and the Duke of Milan at the time was the patron of Leonardo da Vinci. So you can get a time frame of when this happened, when the poems were written, and who some of the big figures were of the time.
Well, I know that we're both Redwood writers,
yes,
part of the California writers, and it was so funny to get an invitation to Milan to come to your book signing. We all enjoyed that so much, thinking, well, if you pay my way, I'll come. You know?
My thought was that you never know who knows people. And although I didn't anticipate any of my friends to actually fly and support me there, I thought, well, you might have a relative or a friend of a friend, and that it was like, if I throw a pebble in a stream, who knows where the waves will go. So, yeah.
Yeah. And how was the book signing there in Milan?
It was fun. It was an incredibly hot day. And it was one of those days where you're just wanting to get out of the heat. And there were quite a few people that were supposed to come that had RSVP'd to the bookstore owner, but I understand that once they got home, they didn't want to venture out. So it was small, but smallly attended, but the people that were there were very excited to hear me speak and to read from my novel. So.
Are you bilingual in Italian?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
We've had an exchange student last year and this year who are from Italy and the Milan region. So it's kind of helping me with that. And when I went to the Congress in Kalamazoo, I met a woman who works at the University of Kentucky, and she specializes in other legends of Charlemagne that are before Ariosto and Boiardo. And so the legends of Charlemagne actually were quite a bit for a couple centuries. So she's helping me out by learning about stories of Ruggiero's parents and how they got together. So she's translating that from the archaic Italian, at least giving me the summaries of it so I can include those details in my sequel, and I'm really grateful for that.
Have you been thinking about having the book translated into various languages?
That would be nice. I don't have the funds right now, and hopefully it will become more popular, and perhaps there'll be a demand for that later. But it would be nice. I do think that there is a natural constituency in both Italy and in France. Italy because that's where the poems were written, and France because that's where the story takes place.
And I know you have traveled to France and done research there.
Yes, I had 2 different trips to France to see the places that I was writing about, and we did spend over a week in Paris both times to see the different museums and such, so I could get an idea of the just artifacts of the period. And then we were in the Midi-Pyrenees region down by Toulouse, and it was just amazing to see the places that I was writing about, and it really infused sensorial details.
Yeah, nothing like the hands-on, real
Yeah.
traveling to enhance your writing. I think it's wonderful that you were able to do an adventure like that.
Right, and it has sparked a love of France in both myself and my husband, and he wants to retire there now.
Oh.
And we wouldn't have that kind of love for it if I hadn't wanted to go there to research my novel and not just try to do it from here and imagine what it was like, but actually to see it and to feel it and to understand a little bit more
Or
about
just
France.
do internet or novel searching. And,
Right. I mean, there's a limit of what you can learn from reading and watching documentaries and such, and then there's some things that you just have to go and see for yourself.
Very fortunate and worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that I had done was once this was all done and written, I had sought out some Muslim readers because many of my characters are Muslim. And while I've learned a lot about Islam, I wanted to make sure that the tone was correct and I didn't make any goofball errors. And there were some things that were corrected, but overall it was pretty good factual wise and tone and such.
So you had some Muslim proofers.
Yes, and they gave me suggestions. There was one part in the first chapter, I had an idea that I wanted to give a prayer, and so help me out. What kind of prayer does one give? And so I had some input on that, and also when they were in war, when you have 5 different times a day when you're supposed to pray, what happens when you're in the middle of a battle and it's time to pray? What do? It's like you stop and put your head down, get it lopped off? I don't think so. So then I was told about the prayer of fear, where if it's time, you can like watch your enemy, and if you're at a distance, you can watch and you can say your prayers, but you don't take your eyes off them. So you don't do the whole thing. It's an abbreviated thing due to circumstances.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's cool, thank you.
Yeah, that probably really aided your writing.
Yeah, those type of details that you just aren't going to find in a normal book about religious practices, because how often do they need to put that into a book? It's not in your frequently asked questions summary guide.
So are you able to read or speak French and Italian to read your source materials?
I've taken French lessons, and mon grammaire en français c'est rustique et rudimentaire, meaning my French grammar is rustic and rudimentary.
Excellent accent, though, I must say.
Thank you. I at least try. We did go, my husband is taking lessons right now at the Alliance de Française de Santa Rosa, which I went there with him for about 2 years before we took our first trip to France. And so learning just how to survive in France was necessary. So when I'm at a museum and I'm reading things, I can get a good idea. It's not a real nuanced idea, knowledge of what is in the case and such, but I can recognize a lot of things. And my French is far better than my Italian, but I can try to recognize cognates in Italian as well.
Mm-hmm. Usually it is easier to read a language than to speak it.
Especially French, because French is very challenging because there's certain letters you don't pronounce except when you do.
That's how a lot of languages are.
And English is the same way. There's certain pronunciations of villages and towns and such that you look at them and you think it should be this way, but the locals pronounce it a different way. Why? Because that's the way we do it. And that's the same thing with French. Italian, I think, is easier because you pronounce every letter. And French, you don't. You pronounce most letters except for these, except when you do, when it's liaison, and et cetera. So it's a challenge. It's really a challenge. And I try.
Well, I think our audience has probably been getting pretty excited about Quest of the Warrior Maiden. So let's hear you read a part from this wonderful epic.
Thank you. So the story picks up after a pitched battle ending outside of Toulouse between the invading North African Muslim army and Charlemagne's Frankish army. The Franks fled, leaving thousands of dead behind. The hero of the story, Rogero, a Saracen soldier, began searching the battlefield for his mentor, worried they might be lying wounded somewhere. Rogero came upon two warriors still engaged in a duel and called out that the Christian soldier should make haste to catch up to Charlemagne's troops. The Saracen warrior refused to give up the fight, and Rogero, being chivalrous, offered to take the Christian soldier's place. He had no idea he was doing a favor for a woman warrior. Bradamante paused at the crest of a hill and scowled at the empty road stretching before her. The rear guard of Charlemagne's army was still not in sight. She shook her head in frustration and took a long drink of water from her flask. How much longer until I catch up with them? Returning her flask to a saddlebag, she turned behind. As she watched the two soldiers in the distance, Rhodamont made a wild swing of his sword at the other knight. She was relieved to see him miss, but then guilt tore through her. What if that Saracen knight dies in my stead? Rhodamont will likely boast that I was cowardly and abandoned my fight with him. Bradamante's face burned as she imagined the humiliation she would face, all because she had grown weary of fighting and wanted to rejoin Charlemagne's army. Her reputation depended on an unknown knight being victorious over a ruthless enemy. May Rhodamont rot in hell. Bradamante tugged the reins on her horse, prodding him to return to the battlefield. Needing to gird herself to face her enemy, she actively purged any thoughts of defeat. However, she was distracted by questions about the courteous Saracen knight and various pretenses she might have for speaking with him. Despite herself, even from a distance, she enjoyed watching the spectacle of two well-trained combatants exchanging blows. Rhodamont was becoming erratic, while the younger knight appeared to be gaining the upper hand. As Bradamante drew near, she was surprised to realize her champion was using the flat side of his blade rather than its edge. This is not a tournament, this is war. Rhodamont will kill you if given the chance. Bradamante held her tongue, lest she interrupt the young knight's concentration and provide Rhodamont an advantage. She did not want to witness the death of a chivalrous knight at her enemy's hands. A sense of relief came over her as the younger knight pummeled Rhodamont. Bradamante smiled as the arrogant commander slumped forward onto his horse's neck. His sword fell to the ground with a resounding clatter. Lowering his blade, the victor watched Rhodamont dangle in the saddle. Courtesy and mercy being extended to such an unworthy recipient amazed her. "Pardon me, sir," Bradamante called out. He turned and bore a look of surprise on his face. "I appreciate your championing my cause. However, I was wrong accepting your generous offer. The duel was not yours to finish, and you should not fight with a fellow soldier. Should Rhodamont recover and wish to continue, please allow me the honor of ending this fight." Smiling at her, he nodded his assent. Rhodamont began stirring. His eyes appeared unfocused as he rose in his saddle, but when he saw his empty right hand, he emitted a curse. "Your courtesy is the victor today, but you failed. You should have killed me when you had the chance. I admit defeat and will leave, but mark my words, I will get my revenge for your insolence." Rhodamont retrieved his sword from the dusty plain, his face convulsed with anger before he rode toward the Saracen encampment. Bradamant faced the young knight, feeling unsure how to proceed. As you said, the battle is over for the day, so she replaced her sword in its scabbard. It is, he agreed, sheathing his sword. There was silence as they exchanged nervous smiles.
You are very talented at reading. Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
And thank you for having me.
Very, very enjoyable. Okay. I still have a few more questions to ask you.
Okay.
But I just wanted to share with the audience, I'm sure, how much we enjoyed your reading.
Okay.
What else in your research did you find that you did not really expect?
Some of the dietary rules were really strange at the time. The Christians had fast days on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, along with Lent and Advent. And that meant that they not only couldn't eat meat, they couldn't eat anything from the land, which was dairy and chicken, and so they could only eat fruit from the sea, fish. So they couldn't eat butter or cheese, and I thought that was really odd. And one of the really strange things that I learned was that they could eat beaver meat because it was considered an animal of the sea. Now, I thought that was really strange, but knew that if I were to introduce the idea of eating beaver meat in my story, that it would make my readers stop cold.
So you decided not to mention beaver.
No. And I figured that the average person who was following the dietary rules of the day didn't understand the theological underpinnings. So I briefly mentioned that they have days that they can't eat meat and dairy and cheese, but did not give the theological underpinnings because I figured they just followed the rules without question because that was their faith. And so I figure anyone who is intrigued will go and look up, and there was Fast and Feast, Medieval Fast and Feast, or a book like that was really fascinating. So that was one of the things that I learned.
Who do you think is part of your readership? Anyone
who likes Arthurian legend or medieval legend, and the difference for mine's historic fantasy. George R.R. Martin and the Lord of the Rings, those are fantasies set in other worlds.
Which are still popular.
Yes. Obviously, The Hobbit and such is going on right now, and Lord of the Rings, but that's in a different world. And it takes place in our real world at a real time, but it's fantasy. And so I think anyone who enjoys fantasy, medievalism, Arthurian legend would enjoy my story. And those who are Francophiles and Italianophiles probably will as well.
And you have a very well-written travel blog that I've read.
Oh, thank you.
That would be worthwhile for our audience to read about your travels in being able to write.
Yes. And so that you can find a link to my blog because it's a little more intuitive from my website.
What we'll do is we'll put it on the credits.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, and I'll mention that again. And we'll put your website on the credits.
Okay.
And so the audience will look for that. And your Facebook page also has quite a bit about the quest of the Warrior Maiden. Tell us a few places where your wonderful book could be purchased.
Okay, in Santa Rosa, it is at the Montgomery Village Copperfields. It's also at Soco Coffee and Sonoma Bagel and Airport Health Club, which is a new place it's at. In Healdsburg, it's at the Bean Affair and at Levin and Company. And in Windsor, my hometown now, is at Pages on the Green. And I think those are the physical places, but you can also find it online through Amazon globally. If you have friends in France or Italy, you can tell them they can get a copy of it. And it's also as an ebook in Barnes & Noble and et cetera.
And you do have it in Italy. And you have it in France also?
Through the Amazon.fr and .it. So yes, they can get...
That's very handy.
Yeah. So if you have an Italian grandmother who read Orlando Furioso when she was young and can read English, then yes, it would be great. She'd love it.
Oh, also, I wanted to mention that you will be having an audiobook coming out really soon.
Well, yes, I'm working on that. I have to work on the editing of it, but then hopefully keep track on my Facebook page and on my website, and I will make that announced when it is available on patiobooks.com.
That's very exciting for people who travel and commute.
Yes.
There's a big surge in appreciation of audiobooks. I think this will lend itself with your voice also, because you're so talented at speaking.
Yeah.
The audiobook should be really fabulous.
Yeah, and I know some people like to listen to it while they're gardening or knitting, and they just like listening to the words rather than reading them. So yes, that will be available. So
wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us on WriterSpeak.
Yeah, I wanted to mention one small thing. In January 28th, 2014, it will be the 1200th anniversary of the death of Charlemagne.
Oh.
That's another big date.
Very timely. You have two timely dates coming up.
Yes, so there we go.
And I'll remind the audience once again to look at the end of the credits for your website and Facebook page.
Sounds good. Okay. Thank you very much for having me.
WriterSpeak was produced at C Media Labs. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Sonoma County Gazette. Please stay tuned next time for an interview with another talented author.